Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We have reached the 7th film in the James Bond Retrospective series we've been doing on the channel with 1971's Diamonds Are Forever, the one that we're all looking forward to, I'm sure. Once again, directed by Guy Hamilton, returning to the director's chair following his directing tenure on Goldfinger, which was an infinitely better James Bond film. I guess that sort of gives my initial impressions away. I think suffice to say, this was one that we were kind of dreading going back to. I think we knew that this one was going to be the not so great one. That being said, I was rediscovering this film. So this was my second time watching this film and, reading a bit more about the film. We're going to be going into the behind the scenes of this thing, how it came to be, obviously the return and kind of departure of Sean Connery within the same movie, which is very confusing, and everything else along the way. Of course, we want you guys to comment along. We already have Nikolai in the comments right now, but as more of you come in, please do comment with your thoughts. But before we dive into this thing and dissect it, tear it apart, whatever you want to call it, over to George with the socials.
Absolutely, guys. As Chris said, comment along with us. Obviously, we're live, so we can bring them up on the screen. We've had a couple where we premiere, a couple where we don't. And yes, this is the last Sean Connery film. So if you liked the Sean Connery films, hit the like button. Do help get the trend up. Find the other Bond fans, get them on, hit the subscribe button, because these videos aren't going away. We're 7 films in. As we can see, we have made it to photo 2. This is, of course, the second one we're on now. We're almost at the Roger Moore era. We're going to speak a bit about that at the end. But one final Connery film for us to have a discussion about, and then we've got 7 weeks straight of Roger Moore. Is it? It's going to be hectic, and if we've got some other things happening. So hit us up on our socials to know more. We show a lot of James Bond gifts when we're doing these videos and whatnot. Chris did some amazing ones today. That is on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterbox.com, and of course our TeePublic link is in that description below. But yes, the main thing today, talking Bond, do comment, because this is going to be, I think, jumping in. I think we're going to have a unison opinion between the three of us that this is so far of the 7 the worst one.
Yeah.
This is going to be a very interesting one, purely out of the fact that I feel like I'm going to err slightly more on the side of good, because I think this one of those films that's so bad it does almost range into that kind of campy, almost good territory. It'd be great for a drink along. That's all I can say about this film before we go into it.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know about that. I might have to drink my sorrows away when it comes to this film. Let's go into the plot for this thing before we dive into it and sort of how this monstrosity of a James Bond film came to be. So the plot for this thing is a diamond smuggling investigation leads James Bond to Las Vegas, where he uncovers an evil plot involving a rich business tycoon. And that's very nicely written there on IMDb. This thing was fascinating reading about this thing. Not just the fact that I had, before we started doing this retrospective, I completely forgot that there was a George Lazenby Bond film sandwiched between the last 2 Sean Connery films. It's so strange. And George, me and you were chatting about this film earlier today briefly. We haven't gone in depth into it, so, you're going to get our first-hand proper conversation on it in this one. You equated it to sort of like the modern-day representation. If Daniel Craig, we have No Time to Die. We have the next Bond. It doesn't perform well. And then you get Daniel Craig back. It's so strange. I don't think I'm trying to think there's maybe another franchise that's done that, but especially one as popular as James Bond, that sounds like absolute madness to me. And I guess I'm going to sort of pitch this, before we get into like the main conversation topic of the return of Connery. This film, and I don't even think that On Her Majesty's Secret Service was ill received. I think it did have a drop off. And maybe it did have some mixed opinions with people that had, been with Connery since the beginning. And then all of a sudden we're greeted with our first new Bond, which was George Lazenby. So maybe there was some, revulsion to that maybe. But this one's just fascinating. I don't know how it came to be. It's just, and I've completely lost my train of thought on this one. But I think it's that it was trying to be more commercial. I think, when you look back at On Her Majesty's Secret Service, by the way, check out our review on that one. That was a really good conversation that we had on that. It felt quite experimental. It felt new. It felt fresh. It felt like the first James Bond film that was actually trying to say something about Bond as a character, the emotion that comes with it, and where that led to. This felt very much like a regression. This felt, let's try and get another Goldfinger. And, we'll go into all the familiar ingredients of Goldfinger in this one. And it didn't work for me at all.
I'm smiling because I've just had the most incredible comparison I want to get out of the way. Yeah, I mean, you look at modern day films, right, and it's incredible with Bond because it's the 70s. It was before I think that's a really good point where someone was saying it's the superheroes before the superheroes, the action stars before we had the action stars from the 80s and things like that. That Bond was that original hero. This is even before The Godfather, which was the biggest film of all time when it came out, and it's amazing to think about that politics. Obviously, we've got the benefit of time. We are 50 years past this release now, so we've got different eyes. Those that maybe watched it at the cinema, those that grew up with it, those that ventured into it that were from the Moore era, who knows? And what's just occurred to me, so I keep smiling. Reactionary, I don't know if it's the word, but let's say there was a film that came out. Let's take The Force Awakens, and then this far superior one came along 2 years later. Obviously, we didn't have social media in 1969, but oh my God, this is different. This isn't Sean Connery. This is a different plot. This is a marriage. This is depressing. This isn't spy work. This isn't massive action scenes. And, obviously at the time, I think this was well respected to a point review-wise, but I'm sure they knew the quality and they were probably thinking down the line that, Lazenby said no to coming back. I don't think anyone probably expected that, which is also mental to think still that a man declined to return in James Bond after one James Bond film. And then you get the follow-up film, which is like, okay, let's bring in the person that sort of did the one before the last one. And let's get things going, which picked up around then. Let's bring back that formula that everyone really enjoys. And I know you kind of see the comparison I'm making with that sort of Flash thing that I'm not saying reactionary is different, but it's very much that
it's a creative tug of war, isn't it? Between
it's
direction they want to take it.
Let's get back to when people weren't saying about anything, and I think that's a really good modern example, actually. And I'm not even going to comprehend a Justice League discussion, but I feel this is very much that there was a plan that didn't work, and they think, shit, what do we do? We didn't anticipate this. Anticipating would have been Lazenby not coming back. You've had Blofeld kill. I always forget her name.
Tracy,
the character
Tracy, wasn't
Tracy.
It? Yeah.
And obviously we've had the actress of Irma Brunt die in between films as well. This comparison's been made, and it's kind of like the revenge film that the opening scene certainly delivers on. Doesn't become a revenge film, and it becomes recognizable, boring territory. And I think that's where the train wreck comes from, is that it was probably so far in development when Lazenby declined coming back that it was probably like, I don't know what to do, hit panic stations. And I think ultimately that's where it all comes down to, because you can tell straight away jumping in that Connery shouldn't be James Bond at this point in time.
Yeah, I found it very interesting that just as kind of, because it's not always the actor that kind of makes the film, if that makes sense. You've got the director, you've got the screenwriter as well, and it's the combination of loads of different things that come together. Because it's the same screenwriter from On Her Majesty's Secret Service as with this film, which is so contrasted. It's unbelievable. I wonder if the kind of not negative, but the kind of not as positive feedback from the previous film of On Her Majesty's Secret Service being a more serious film, having more serious elements and stuff like that, they went, okay, we need the next film to be fun. And that was the only word that was thrown around. And they've gone bonkers over the top to make it as camp as possible, as kind of detracted away from the previous film as possible. And I do find that, the overcorrection was a little bit too much for this film, at least. Like, you can clearly not see this film working with Lazenby as Bond. I just cannot see that. That would just be too weird for me. But it somehow, in some element, does still work with Sean Connery because he was able to pull off a little bit of the campiness. At the same time, this film does feel like it should have been made for Roger Moore. So it's very interesting how it's kind of played around and stuff like that. I know that they were looking for different people to play Bond after Lazenby said, no, I won't come back. So, like, maybe they were kind of, stuck in the situation, we'll just bring back Sean Connery as a placeholder, but maybe this film would have suited better if it was a Roger Moore film. It's a very interesting debate to kind of go ahead with that, especially because he was the next Bond immediately after this.
Yeah, there is an interesting sense of when it comes to the continuity from on Her Majesty's Secret Service going into this one, which they originally did intend to have that continuity, as we've mentioned, as George just mentioned about Bunt and Blofeld, and having it be a revenge film, which I guess in sort of a modern standpoint in the Bond franchise is kind of what Quantum of Solace became, leading on from Casino Royale, which is sort of like an interesting parallel there. Just before going into sort of like the behind the scenes stuff, I want to bring up Nikolai's comment right here, because I think this is actually spot on. I feel like the enjoyment of Diamonds Are Forever depends on whether or not you like or love On Her Majesty's Secret Service and whether or not you're watching them in order. I feel like as a standalone, Diamonds Are Forever would be at least a bit more fun. And I guess that's where you're coming from, Tate, that you can sort of see, you get like a sense of enjoyment from the campiness and having it be like a standalone thing. In order, it doesn't help. And obviously the 2 times that I have watched this film has been when I've gone in order from that first James Bond film leading up to this one.
But very, very quickly on top of that, just going back to what George said about like the opening scene, that continuing on from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, it is a bit of tonal whiplash if you're going from he's just gone and killed his kind of his now wife. It's massive tonal whiplash from he's killed his wife and then he's making quips as he kind of like goes after Blofeld at the very start of the next film. It's so out of place if you're watching it in that order, which is why maybe it works better as that kind of separate standalone thing.
Mm-hmm. So this was so interesting. So like originally they wanted to get the same director back from On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which was Peter R. Hunt. He was filming something else at the time. He was working on another project, and he said that, look guys, I will come back. I'll gladly come back as long as you postpone the release date, because I'm working on this right now and then I'll need to work on this after. The higher ups in the studio wouldn't allow it, so they obviously had to push on, and then they get back in Guy Hamilton. And just from that choice alone, obviously, like, he did a great Bond film with Goldfinger. I'm not saying he didn't, but it seems very much like an act of desperation. Like, well, this worked last time. Let's just get all the same ingredients in. Let's get Connery. Let's get the director. We'll get onto it later with the theme, Shirley Bassey, and hopefully have the same hit. And, you know, tonally, whether it's a case of cinema was moving on at that point. I mean, we're into the 70s now, the start of a new decade. Trends are changing, opinions are changing on films, and even the tone of films are changing. You could argue that we're starting to see more of a maturity to films. I'm not going to say they're completely mature, because there are some completely ridiculous Roger Moore films that we've got coming up in the next few weeks, but there is definitely a feel change to this film. It feels very different from those early Bond films, from your Dr. No's or, you know, from Russia with Love. And originally, you know, like you mentioned about the same screenwriter as well. Well, you had Richard Maybaum, who obviously did the screenplay for the previous film. His screenplay was a direct sequel to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. It was a revenge film, as we've mentioned numerous times. That was put forward, and Broccoli and is it Saltzman? Is that the name of the other producer? They didn't like it for whatever reason. They said the script wasn't good. They wanted to go in a different direction. They made him do a complete page one rewrite, and I guess the direction was make it like those earlier Bond films and not like moving into new territory. And then they also got rewrites from an American screenwriter called Tom Mankiewicz, because because it was predominantly set in the US, they felt they wanted a US screenwriter as well to contribute to the dialogue, because I think there's a quote somewhere where they say that British people struggle to write dialogue for Americans. So they wanted, you know, straight from the source, they wanted an American writer who could embody the American stuff and the British stuff in a script. And we have our script for this film. So you have the clear, conscious decision from the producers of retread. And that's exactly what the film feels like. But especially coming after the previous film, you felt like Bond was maturing. It was moving into bolder new territory. And maybe it does because, you know, all the other Bond films straight after this do have that very formulaic feel to them. So maybe this one kind of gets singled out because it's the one that's immediately following the breath of fresh air that we had last time. I don't know. It's very interesting, but I definitely get that sense of desperation and just kind of they didn't really know what to do for this one.
Yeah, I think the script is a big thing. That if they're now catering, because the America stuff, you know, I'm not saying it's financially driven, but, you know, you look at, was it Thunderball, which was adjusted for inflation, like the biggest one in America, and you got to think that there is this lucrative, humongous market now that Bond had reached to, and you talk about Connery at the sort of the peak of his fame and when he left the role, and sort of going back to the comment we had earlier as well from Nikolai, was that very much, you know, if you watch this in isolation, would you watch this in isolation? Like, if you're going to pick any, if you're going to pick any of the 24 to watch like on one Friday night,
you want to really watch Carry On Bond, as someone I think once called it? Pretty much, and. Oh yeah, it's one of them. I think certainly, you know, that whole script stuff, because it feels like Tate, you mentioned really well about it being sort of feels like a Roger Moore film. The one-liners are out, and maybe there's too many of them. There's a hell of a lot of them, and the writing of some of the characters, and I think obviously with the villains as well, they're so not villainous, but
Blofeld, like, aha, smart villain. He was like, here's the weird henchman, which is what they're trying to do. And it's so stereotyped. And it's as stereotyped as you could want it to be. And I think that's where it starts to stick out, that this jump to America was the production values. And this is a film I'd imagine that maybe, I'm not sounding horrible, but is it a film that the American audience would appreciate more than the British audience, or vice versa? So it's a fascinating discussion on this behind the scenes, but as you can tell, you can tell this is played. I think, again, in 1971, you wouldn't know any of that stuff, but now you can see it, not only because we've seen what came after, but you can see those issues and how they were arising and what they had to change. And I think that does have a big part of it. And going back to what you said, Chris, the sort of the tonal whiplash that, it doesn't work as a marathon setting, but I just don't even think it compares to the other Connery films that, in theory, in sequence, it could work with the ending, as someone mentioned, but it's just one of them where even that would feel a bit jump again, like recasting Blofeld, and we know he's been recast a lot of times, but the complete different Blofeld recasting and the face stuff, which, I don't actually mind the concept of, but it's so meandering. And I'm going to kind of go into what I messaged you earlier, Chris, when we were talking about it. It was very much that they wanted to make out this wasn't like the Bond 4, like, here's a Blofeld killing opening scene, let's write him out, let's have this really, let's be honest, below par diamond smuggling adventure, whatever you want to call it, what the hell it's trying to be. It's like, aha, Blofeld's alive after all, he tricked us all, the trickster, the master of disguise. And that's where I think the issues are. It's so badly written leading up to some of those moments, it just falls apart. So I'd much rather have had a terrible film about smuggling diamonds than it trying to 180 and then turn back into a Blofeld villain film.
That comment about bringing in an American writer, after you said that, you can immediately see that. And I also noticed that he's brought on for the first two Roger Moore films as well, and you can definitely tell that with a certain American character, shall we say, in those films, which is meant to be the comic relief. But it just does feel so out there and different. And I'll play in another kind of card into the what if scenarios, because Sean Connery could have easily come on for On Her Majesty's Secret Service. That was a possibility that he could have come on for that film. That still wouldn't work in the continuation, but would this film have had a completely different tone if On Her Majesty's Secret Service had a completely different tone? It's one of those hypotheticals that it just kind of strayed off and is a very kind of different scenario in general. I think Nikolai actually put in the comments about reading an argument where you could switch around the order.
I was thinking that when I was watching this,
It does feel like it could easily go on from You Only Live Twice, and then kind of the end of the era one be the kind of serious film, and then you'd move on to kind of, I know you've obviously got George Lazenby in that role, but you would then completely change the tone once again and move on to the Roger Moore films.
Just put Goldfinger at the end of the Connery ones, because it's the only non-Spectre one, and it could be a lovely little epilogue because it's the best one.
But
well, actually, interestingly about that, the Goldfinger thing, we keep talking about the retread. We will get on to Sean Connery in a moment, because I think that's going to be one of the bulk of our conversation on this film. One of the ideas when they were thinking about the villain for this thing, it was going to be the twin brother of Goldfinger avenging the death of, could you get any more retread than that? It's amazing to read about some of the thoughts they had on this thing. I will say though, if you did this as hopefully you'd recast Blofeld in a way, because if you did this as a direct lead up to You Only Live Twice, then a guy who's just like an agent in the field who gets assassinated all of a sudden becomes the main villain. And we'll get onto that when we talk about the casting of Blofeld. I do want to say, before we get onto Blofeld later on, I looked everywhere to try and find an interview, an excerpt from anything explaining their thought process of bringing that same actor back in the place of the villain. I couldn't find anything. So they just went with it for whatever reason. Shall we talk about Sean Connery in this film? And what I think is going to be the interesting thing is that, we talk about the campy tone with this one and how it does it either ruins the film for you or you can watch it as its own thing, right? I think it's and I will get onto another comparison later on, don't you worry about this, but Batman and Robin, some people can watch that film and go, oh, well, it's its own thing. It's just stupid. Have fun with it. Other people go, this is a continuation from 89 Returns, even Forever gets a lot of love, and we get onto this one and it's a complete abomination. Why do the ingredients of the campiness work in a lot of the earlier Bond films and even some of the later ones as well, but not specifically in this one. And I do think it is because it does follow on from that previous film. Maybe if in the future I do another sort of retrospective and I'd sort of watch through these films again, if I skip out on Her Majesty's Secret Service and go straight from, what would it be, You Only Live Twice into this one, would it have the same effect? But I don't know. Let's talk Connery. So he demanded and was given 1.25 million to come back for this film, which he took. To be fair,
what's the price in modern days for that? Because I'm sure that is ridiculous.
I'm going to bet probably 50, 60 mil. That's got to be Robert Downey Jr. figures.
But I will say to him, fair play to him for this one. He did, according to Wikipedia, he did use the fee, and with that, he established the Scottish International Education Trust, where Scottish artists could apply for funding without having to leave their country to pursue their career. So that's really good of him. That he didn't just sort of pocket the money. And just to sweeten the deal as well, the company said, we will make 2 films of your choice. Whatever you want, you got it. We want you back for this, to entice him into the role. And one of those films was made, which was apparently called The Offense, which was directed by one of Connery's friends at the time. And the other film, unfortunately, didn't get made, which would have been an adaptation of Macbeth with Connery as the leading role. Because apparently there was a Roman Polanski version of Macbeth getting made. But could you imagine that? There are now 2 tragedies of this film. Number 1, the direct sequel to On Her Majesty's Secret Service that we never got, and number 2, the Sean Connery led, performed, directed, whatever depiction of Macbeth. I would have loved that. But they got him back, and he probably shouldn't have come back. He is noticeably aged. He feels tired. He feels so done. I mean, we keep talking about how he was mentally checking out as each film went on, and you could kind of see it, but he still kind of had the spirit there in some of them, even when you get to, like, Thunderball and You Only Live Twice. He's just so out of place in this one, and I think this is probably going to be the same way when we get onto the Roger Moore films. Granted, I've never watched Octopussy and especially A View to a Kill, but I am very much looking forward to watching A View to a Kill when we eventually get to that one. You get to the point where you go, he's too old to play this role. He should not be playing Bond right now. And you get that. And I think that adds to the sense of parody with this film. I really do. Like, it feels like a piss take of Bond. It doesn't feel like a legit Bond film. I think that comes down to the tone. We will talk about, we've already had, I think Nikolai mentioned it, Blofeld dressing in drag. We're going to be talking about all the cringeworthy scenes in this film. But I also think that Connery coming back to it, delivering those same one-liners with the same kind of shtick, it feels old at this point. I do want to just mention really quickly before, passing over the conversation, the other actors that were were contenders to take up the mantle of Bond, if they couldn't get Connery back. There's John Gavin, who was in Psycho. He's sort of introduced towards the end. He's the love interest of the sister.
Yeah.
You had Clint Eastwood. You had Adam West. I mean, Adam West would have been right at home in this film, as far as I'm concerned. And even Burt Reynolds were all considered. And
I was going to say that immediately just screams at me. They wanted it to be American.
Exactly, yeah. And a number of them, Eastwood and Reynolds and Adam West said that Bond shouldn't be played by an American actor. Fair play to them. And a British actor that was considered, this is going to blow George's mind, I think, being a Harry Potter fan, Michael Gambon, who said that he was not in shape for it, but the role was offered to him at a time as well. Very interesting choices. Maybe it's a blessing that we got Connery back. Who knows? But yeah, I thought that was interesting reading some of those names. I can't quite imagine them, to be honest.
I'm trying to find pictures of what Michael Gambon looked like.
Yeah, I'm trying to find. Oh, okay, fair enough. Yes,
I see bits of it. I think a big thing with these is that now it's British, right? But back then, there's been 2 James Bonds, an Australian and a Scotsman. It's not very much, that British actor isn't set in stone. And I think, obviously, after Moore and Dalton, they'd go on to realise that, this is a thing. Granted, it's more the British Isles because, we've had a Scotsman, an Englishman, an Irishman, and a Welshman so far, and now an Australian. It's one of them where I could see it. And I think the big thing is getting Connery back, that he doesn't look... Don't want to be horrible to say he's not fit, but yeah, like you can see the grey hair. When you get the opening scene, this is my gripe. I think I said this to you, Chris, that the way the opening scene's done, they're trying to copy On a Majesty's Service. It's like, here's the big reveal to the new James Bond. Except this time we have a very recognizable voiceover. I'm not going to do a Connery voice, but shouting, "Where's Blofeld?" It's like, oh, that voice, I wonder if there's any other people in the world that sound anything like that. And it's just funny, this big reveal, and it's kind of like, we know he's back. It's not really like it's a new Bond. It should have that build up. I think that's the problem I have with it, is it's trying to not forget the past, but it's trying to really be its own thing too quickly. And I think, and that's where some of the mistakes are. I had a really good point to say, but I've been completely blown away by the Michael Gambon stuff. So I'm going to hand it over to someone else because I've forgotten what my point was before that.
He does look tired for this film. I don't know if he looks more tired in this film, whether he looks more tired in You Only Live Twice. I feel like the campiness of this film and the nature of what this film is basically about, because in You Only Live Twice, it's quite action-based. There is a lot of action beats to go along with it, whereas this film, there aren't as many. It's more of a kind of meandering story, and maybe that lends to kind of not the laziness of the performance, but the kind of lack of kind of energy towards the performance. But I'd say it was on par, at least, with You Only Live Twice as far as how much energy he put into it. It is surprising that he still gives off a very checked-out performance, even though he's coming back for the same character. It's very unusual in that way. But either way, like, yeah, this film, I don't know what it needed. I genuinely don't know what it needed to make it a better film.
Page one rewrite, maybe. Just who knows?
Maybe if they went with the original kind of the darker tone and continued Bond in that way, who knows? Who knows?
I mean, it would have been the first Bond film to really kind of be a direct sequel. Not to say that there isn't a sequel quality to them, because, again, going back to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, you have that scene where it does link back into the previous Bond adventures with the music's reprised and some of the gadgets that were used. So you could say that would have been a direct sequel, which would have been the first one. And obviously we don't get that now until Quantum of Solace. I think it's just that Connery just looks noticeably older. He looks slower. Yeah. He looks a bit chubbier, just unfit, really. And, Nikolai mentioned a really great comment here. How unbelievable is it that Roger Moore was older in his first Bond film?
That was it. Yeah, that was what I was thinking. Yeah. And it's what you were saying about when you're excited for View to Kill It. It's always been mad that Moore was always older. And I think, once you hit sort of Moonraker once, it's kind of like, Moonraker's like, fair enough, you hit the 80s, it's like, this needs to stop. Make it stop, please. And it carried on and on and on. And then eventually we got Timothy Dalton, which we'll get to in a couple of months. But no, I think Moore is that gentleman. And I'm not saying Moore, Moore would have been far better in this film. I always want to say I'm so glad Moore didn't get Blofeld. You get the terrible opening of For Your Eyes Only. And it's always that, if Roger Moore had jumped in and there'd been a Blofeld central villain film, it would have been a bit too extreme. So I'm glad that I will take this massacre in order to then get a complete, as far as I'm aware, reboot in the next film. With, I don't know, 2 years after, it's the similar gap, but we need to get a new Bond. We need to do something. And I think you'll notice as well, certainly I always felt that with Live and Let Die and A Man of the Golden Gun, it feels smaller budget than these. It's not trying to be as humongous. It's still big films. But it's when you get to Spy Who Loved Me, that's when you realise that the production's back in, insanity sets, all that kind of stuff. It very much feels smaller budget, lower stakes, which do work in its favour. Whereas, the whole world domination, I think it's tired at this point. And that's the problem. The world domination trope, how many Bond films in a row is that? And I know it's a big Bond thing, but, after a while, you just need to put Spectre in a can and just sort of get rid.
Yeah. And it just gets steadily more ridiculous. And this is just like the cherry on top of the cake, at least in this point in terms of Bond's history, but specifically linked with the Spectre stuff. I guess we should.
Sorry. Yeah, no, I was just going to say, we were saying this beforehand, because I think you're going to move on to villains there. I have a big problem with villains in this film. I have a massive problem with the fact that Blofeld is the main villain. I know they obviously wanted to do the continuation and stuff like that, and they have him in the opening scene. And then, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen this film, Blofeld comes back at the end. I have such a big problem with that. I don't think it suited this film even slightly. I know they had the two camp kind of side villains with Mr. Kidd and Mr. Wint. But, Jesus, this film would have worked way better, and we were discussing this beforehand, with someone like a casino owner. Just have it as a balls to the walls out American kind of villain. The film's set in America, you're kind of expecting that villain to be the person who runs the casino. It ends up being Blofeld. I don't like that even slightly. it cheapens kind of what Blofeld was in the previous films. I know people have already been chatting in the chat here about what happens in the film and how it kind of campifies everything. But if you wanted to make Blofeld look kind of menacing and stuff like that, just the camp nature of this film and how he's portrayed in this film does not lend to him being a menacing villain at all. It lends to him being a kind of Saturday morning kind of cartoon villain. It's awful. It's so badly done. Like,
especially when you get to like the end of the film and he's in like the little midget submarine and he's getting swung around. He's like, "No, I said up." It's ridiculous. It's stupid. And I wonder if Blofeld is a carryover of that initial script they were going to do, the revenge story, where obviously it would have made sense for him to come back because he was behind the death of Bond's wife. In this film, as it is, there's no real reason that it needs to be Blofeld. You could come up with an original villain, as you mentioned, one that's sort of like more American and, you know, like the Las Vegas kind of lifestyle. That could have been, and I think that would have matched the campier tone, but I don't like that they take a pre-existing character. You know, say what you want about Pleasance or Savalas, but we're going to go to it. Let's just bring up the scene now.
It's now 3 films in a row as well.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not a surprise anymore. If you've got Blofeld in the film at any point, it's like, well, he's going to be the main villain then, isn't he?
Yeah, it feels tired, but the one scene that I'm going to go to, and thank God I don't have a picture for this thing, because this would burn itself into your nightmares for all eternity. The scene where he basically dresses as Mrs. Doubtfire. He looks exactly like Mrs. Doubtfire. It's so random. It's in like such a quick scene, and it's kind of pointless in the film, really. I mean, Blofeld is a master of disguise, I guess, unless he's dressing in drag. But just take that concept of Blofeld, this villain that's been bigged up since... I want to say it was from Russia with Love, wasn't it? I don't think we saw... Was he mentioned in... I don't think he was mentioned in Dr. No, was he? I think Spectre was, maybe, but... you know, he was always this guy in the shadows, this menacing voice initially that you'd hear with the cat and the whole image that went with Spectre. You get the reveal of the very creepy depiction, physical performance of Donald Pleasance. You know, say what you want about his character, but he was creepy. Could you imagine Donald Pleasance in a scene with this dressing in drag and played for laughs? No. And especially when you get to Telly Savalas as well, you know, we had that conversation. I kind of came more around to him as Blofeld by the end of that conversation, where he is having toe-to-toe equal conversations with Bond, and they're completely like on the same page as each other. You know, one fighting for ultimate good, the other ultimate evil. Very menacing, very creepy, very monotone. Could you imagine him dressed in drag? You know, it's so comical, it's so random, and I guess it fits the campy tone, but that's like a big gut punch to this film for me when I'm watching this, is where you've got Blofeld, this character. And I like Charles Gray as well. I think that Charles Gray is a tremendous actor. I love his sort of like, I don't even say cameo, but like his very small but important role that he had in You Only Live Twice. I really like that character. And he looks like he's having a good time with this one. It looks like he's having a whale of a time. And he plays what he's given very well. It's just that tone. There is no moment where I'm looking at Charles Gray's Blofeld character and feel like he's remotely threatening, menacing, or anything like that, or even the same character that we'd seen in the previous ones, despite the fact that he's played by a different actor. You know, Telly Savalas, you know, was very different to Pleasance, but he still played the role of that serious, commanding presence on screen, which is kind of what you want from a Blofeld character. This guy was just ridiculous. He was a cartoon character, as you mentioned. Yeah, he was a Saturday morning cartoon.
Dick Dastardly kind of.
I'll get you next time, James Bond kind of thing, which are all components of what the character of Blofeld have been before. You know, Donald Pleasance sort of fleeing at the end, even in many ways on Her Majesty's Secret Service, where he's in the bobsled escaping, and the neck brace scene that we all love. That was kind of ridiculous, the image of that, but he was always that character that would sort of like live to fight another day. But it's just the comic tone, the tone of the whole film, not just, I think it kind of centers specifically around his character, but this is a thread that's running throughout the entire film, not just this character. But I think because it is an established villain that we've had for so many films in a row, it kind of does leave a bad taste in your mouth by the end of it.
Yeah, this is my problem as well, is that I think when you look at Blofeld, he's always a villain I've never really cared for. Just because how many times can you put a villain in a film and have them lose because they're losing to the super spy, the superhero? And I think when you look at this one with Charles Gray, I really like him, but I just think he's got nothing to work with. You know, when you look at him in You Only Live Twice, He's by far one of the more interesting characters. The way he's acting with Bond, talking with Bond, and the concept of Blofeld being this master of disguise is interesting. The whole facial restructure thing is interesting, but it's just a terribly written script. And I think if it had had more chances, it would have been a really interesting Blofeld. And the fact they wanted him not just with hair, but they wanted him to be a Blofeld that is different, like surgically. I think that is interesting within itself. But making it a Saturday morning nonsense, taking them out after 5 minutes, putting him back in at the halfway point, you just lose so much with that. And I think he's trying to do the best with a terrible script. That's kind of my thoughts. And that's why there's such a comment by Nikolai. A similar thing with Dine of a Day. Great actor, not so great character. I would say the same. Yeah, that's absolutely fair. I think that's the problem with Bond. And look, Bond as a whole, they very, very, very rarely don't cast a fantastic actor to play the villain. I think to me the Bond villain is more interesting. Not that I'm an actor, but if you're an actor, to me the Bond villain's a more interesting role than playing James Bond. And I think they've shown that in the last few years, certainly in the Craig era, certainly many of these eras, how many fantastic actors are playing them. And it's a shame when you get someone that could have stolen it, but it's a dud. And it's a one and done. And it's like, there's a reason Blofeld doesn't come back as a main villain until 2015, and it's not just a rights issue. It was time to get rid of him, start up fresh, tell some other stories, have some other villains. Let's get this thing going again and move away from that. And I think that's what it needed to do.
You do have two quite intriguing villains with Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, but they're kind of played off as the side plot, and they're never brought into it. I don't think they could have worked as the main villain. You've always got these kind of side villains that come in and everything like that. But I wouldn't say that they were. I mean, for the material they were given, I'm sure they did the best job they could have with it. They were quite odd and unusual characters, memorable within their own films, right? I'd say, dare I say, possibly even more memorable than Blofeld was in this film for what they actually did and stuff like that. But how would you guys rate kind of their performances and where they stand in Bond?
Yeah, so I'm kind of mixed on these two characters. Real quick, though, I do want to bring up, and this was kind of going to your previous point about the villain, Tate. Hennick mentioned here about this is sort of like in direct comparison to the Ian Fleming novel. The main villains of the novel are omitted from this film. The actual main villains in the book were a mobster gang with Jack and Serafimo Spang, but they did use Shady Tree, Mr. Wint, and Mr. Kidd that were also in the book in the film. They just removed the main antagonist, and I'm guessing that would have been that different feel that you would have wanted from it. Hennick mentions there they don't even mention the Serafimo gang on the screen. I think that would have added a different dynamic. But specifically going to Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd, I'm so torn because they are so campy in the film. They are ridiculous. And, I don't want to badmouth the actors. It does very much feel like two random people have just walked on set. And, I think it was Nikolai mentioned earlier about he's not too keen on Guy Hamilton's direction of the James Bond films. He mentioned that they're quite mean-spirited and they just look really low budget and a little bit grimy. And every time they come on screen, I kind of get that really kind of sleazy feel to them. I feel like I almost need a shower after watching scenes with them. They kind of feel out of place. And I wouldn't put them in like the pantheon of like best sort of henchmen in James Bond, but I'm not going to lie. When I went back to this film, the only thing that I remembered about it was the recasting of Blofeld and the fact that I didn't like it. That was pretty much all I remembered before rewatching this film. But as soon as these two guys came on screen, I was like, oh, it's that one with these two. And I immediately remembered seeing them. So I think they're memorable in their own right. And they do get some kind of cool scenes. We'll talk about their death scene because, that's ridiculous. But they look like they're having fun. They're so out of place to me that it kind of works. And they just feel really grimy and horrible, nasty people that it kind of, I don't know, it kind of works. I'm so split because they don't sort of like fit the criteria of a archetypal James Bond henchman. But they're so kind of different and, dare I say, ordinary that it kind of makes them unique in that regard. It's such a strange thing with these two. I don't know what to make of them, really.
No, the henchman stuff's exactly what I think. That if you really look at the Bond films up to this point, to me, this is in terms of henchmen. You think of iconic Bond henchmen, right? They're all so different than one another. You got Odd Job, who's from Korea, has a hat. you've got these two guys who were just weird, and I think it's believed they were meant to be gay at the time, but they'd never obviously publicly said it in the 70s on film, let alone for American audiences. And I wouldn't say like Irma Brunt and those are from On Her Majesty's Secret Service. They feel like secondary villains, but as the henchmen, because they are just assassinating people on behalf of Blofeld. I think there's enough about them to stand out for themselves as being that what's their characteristic. This sounds weird. They're weird. And it's the whole, clean shaven, short hair versus long hair, keep them away from schools vibe. And no, but that's how it feels. It's uncomfortable viewing, and and I think because they obviously kill everyone they meet in the opening, because the opening act is just like the trail of them killing people to get close to the diamonds. That by the time Bond walks past them at the crematorium type place, something's going to kick off. So I think they serve the purpose as Bond henchmen really well, but I just don't like them because they're a bit twisted in my head, and that's exactly what I'm mentioned. They scare him, and luckily I didn't see this when I was a kid, but these would probably terrify me. But I think in the terms of Bond henchmen, they're right up there for iconography.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of on the fence as well. They are iconic. They do stand out. I wouldn't put them as the best, but they are one of the most memorable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, totally. Absolutely.
But yeah.
Probably a top 8 without me actually thinking about the other big ones.
Top 8. So I mean,
it's like the top third, isn't it, for henchmen?
I mean, henchmen's, at least for me, off the top of my head, that stand out would be Odd Job and Jaws are the two that immediately I would go to. But yeah,
I mean, I've got to say, there's a lot of Bond films that I still have yet to watch that I still haven't seen. So I'm gonna talk about the henchmen once we get to the end of these things. Let's talk about the Bond girls for this thing. I guess if you're really stretching, you could say there's 3. There's one who shows up in like the montage at the beginning, and I can confirm, which was very shocking, the first full frontal nudity, not counting shirtless James Bond in this film. Not that I went looking for it, but anyway, moving on. We have let's talk about the main one first. So you have our first American Bond girl, Tiffany Case, played by Jill St. John. Oh God, where do I begin? I hate her. She's one of my least favorites. She's insufferable in this film. There are some sort of like great lines with her, mostly coming from Bond, and I'm not going to sort of announce them now because that will be when we get into the James Bond Pun of the Week section of this review, which is always one of my favorites to talk about. I think the scene that just sealed the deal for me is at the very end on the oil rig where she gets the machine gun and she fires the machine gun and the recoil makes her fall off the oil rig. I was done a long time before that point, but that scene I was just like, no. And again, especially coming hot off the heels of On Her Majesty's Secret Service, where you have Tracy, like one of arguably the best Bond girl, easily up for debate, but I think that what she accomplishes in that film, what she stands for, how strong a character she is, coming to this one, it was like, oh dear. Wait, again, it's that regression I talked about with like Connery and the tone. Yeah, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan.
Easily one of the worst characters in James Bond. However, Jill St. John, I can't find the quote that she did really. I think it's something like "Diamonds are forever, my youth is not." I have a list of her famous boyfriends to go through, which she has
was this the one?
Jesus,
this was the one. She has very, very publicly mocked herself. Okay, some of these people may have heard of. Married 4 times. 3 of the celebrities: Lance Riebenthal, old school actor; Jack Jones, Robert Wagner. Okay, now these are relationships: Ben Barnes, Jan Bulgari, Sammy Kane, Michael Caine, Ola Cassini, Barry Coe, Sean Connery, Amit Ergen, Robert Evans, Glenn Ford, David Frost, Bill Hudson, Henry Kissinger, Sidney Korshak, Sandy Koufax, Peter Lawford, George Lazenby, who she was with before Sean Connery and got rid of him during this, Trini Lopez, Tom Mankiewicz, who I think wrote the screenplay, right? George Montgomery, Jack Nicholson, Roman Polanski, Alejandro Ray, Tom Selleck, Frank Sinatra, Robert Vaughn, and to cap it all off, Adam West.
Oh, man.
Jesus
I am
Christ.
not mocking her, but she has been very vocal about the fact that she would not be young for long.
Jesus Christ! I mean, that's the dreaded
What
question.
an icon!
Significant other, like, how many guys have you been with? And it's like, do I tell the truth or do I lie?
Jesus. Wow.
Man.
It's what made it to me was that she was with George Lazenby and then got with Sean Connery whilst doing this. That's I
mean, it doesn't. When you said Jack Nicholson, that doesn't surprise me, because is there a woman on earth that guy hasn't slept with? Let's be fair, but that is mad.
Okay, my opinions on Tiffany Case. You've gone from, in my opinion, the best Bond girl, and you then follow it up with, in my opinion, at least top 3 worst Bond girls, or at least the worst leads. You're right. I think the word you used there was insufferable. You're correct in saying that. It is painful when she's on screen, and even the campiness of the film doesn't lend to the fact that just her performance. I think it's partly to do with kind of screenplay and stuff like that. It's also very much to do with the performance as well. Yeah. It just doesn't feel right. It just feels very off. I don't know if it was because like Sean Connery wasn't putting in the energy, so she didn't put in the energy or anything like that, but she is basically, if she is the reason, I know they go to America in the film, but if she is the reason why they need an American writer on, dear God, that's just awful.
Yeah, it's not great, is it? And Nikolai agrees with you as well. He says sometimes people go a bit soft on Tiffany because the actress is so likable and whatnot. I'm sure she is, but especially coming on and then he mentions about, after Tracy, you're kind of going to come down hard on the Bond girls. And I think rightly so as well. We've seen a lot of other great Bond girls, even in the previous ones we've talked about, Domino, Romanova, even to some extent Pussy Galore. Like, at least there's elements of a character there where she can kind of handle herself. This one was just terrible. And I was watching it, and I know that, James, especially the one that I'm going to mention now, Temple of Doom, there'll be even more glaring comparison to that film later on when we talk about some of our favorite scenes or favorite death scenes in the film, at least. And I was thinking about the character of Willie Scott in that one, which again is a character that gets a lot of hate for being the kind of helpless damsel in distress, like constantly screaming. Just a lot of people would probably use the word insufferable for her as well. And I was thinking, why do I like her character more than I do with Tiffany's character in this one, when they are very much the same kind of character? And I think it's just because, number one, there's only 3 Indiana Jones, well, 4, but, 3 in the series, and she does feel different. It feels like a breath of fresh air. It's not the same kind of character that Marion was or Elsa Schneider was in the last one. This one, we're like, what did I say, 7 films with this one at this point? And you've proven in the franchise before that you can have multiple capable women. It just felt so lazy. It felt that, fair enough, if you want to do a sort of regression to the old style, doesn't mean that you need a completely helpless Bond girl in there. You can still give her stuff to do, give her some agency in the film. And I guess that kind of takes us on to the second Bond girl of this film with Plenty O'Toole. The names are just so ridiculous in this one, aren't they? I quite like her character in this. She's not in it all that much. She's very much that sort of like hanger on to whoever's successful at the roulette table, essentially. But she's pretty much out of the movie. I don't think she really gets enough to do in the film to be particularly memorable, other than the name. The name's definitely memorable, I'll give her that, but the fact that she's just off in quite a brutal way, I'll say, actually.
Yeah.
Reading about the filming of this, the actress herself, I think she was a trained diver, so, she could handle herself in water, essentially. They did very loosely tie her to a concrete block in the pool for filming, but every time they'd reset, I think the pool was almost like on a slope, so the thing was moving towards the deep end. And there was a part where she did have to be rescued. She claims that she was struggling for quite a considerable amount of time. Other reports say that they were pretty much on it, and there were health and safety people constantly watching at the time and rescued her. But it was a different time of filmmaking, the 70s, where you could throw caution to the wind a little bit more. But her character's fine. It's just I just don't like this film, so she didn't really do anything for me, really.
It's that Bond girl casino type thing, tragic ending, and it could have been a more brutal death. I guess they do tease it with the whole swimming pool surviving the first fall, and obviously not the drowning that followed it shortly after. But I don't mind it. It's again, there's just nothing to it, and I think because obviously Jill St. John's character is, I think because you've had Tracy, they want to do a polar opposite. He's just been married, so we want to make sure with someone that's definitely not going to be sticking around for more than a film. And I think they have to go such an opposite way to what they did previously, where that's where all of them come into it, and it's going back to that, how do we have someone sort of killed quite memorably? And it's that sort of, was it just the tip of her nose goes into the water so she like drowns as slowly as possible? Or it's pretty dark and vulgar the more you think about it, and they are lucky nothing went wrong in truth. But I don't have much thoughts on it. She's just another sort of Bond girl that comes and goes, and it's just a forgettable film for it.
The more we talk about this film, the more it kind of becomes obvious this film is very anti on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Very anti. Like, every decision is made kind of in spite of it. And yeah, introducing the most memorable thing that happens to her is she gets thrown out a window. And I mean the death scene as well to go along with that, but she is there just for Bond to basically have sex with and then move on. That's it. Like, no character development
it's just
at all.
The formula, isn't it? Yeah. And you know, George, you mentioned about like her death scene as well. Thinking about especially the more recent James Bond films, the Craig era, there's a lot of that going on, especially when you get to Skyfall and stuff like that. Okay, let's talk about probably the biggest positive for me of this film. The music. Let's talk about, again, I'm going to talk about the Barry score first, and then the main headliner of this film, the titular track. Solid score again. It was nice. Someone actually did tell me what the name of that song was. I keep mentioning it. The one from the Gypsy Camp Escape from Russia with Love. I think someone mentioned it was called Seven Theme. I don't know if that's true or not. It's quite this victorious theme. It comes back right at the end of this film when Bond's messing around with the controls, when he's like slamming Blofeld into everything. I always love that piece of music. And once again, you have the sort of title track instrumental that works into the main score itself, which is always great to hear. Just Barry is the sound of Bond, in my opinion. And the title track. Now, there isn't actually much to say about this. I was trying to look for more information on the song. It was just Shirley Bassey did the song. That's pretty much it. There were no other like runner-ups I didn't find.
I know a little bit from the ATED podcast that obviously ran last week. The guy that wrote the song told Shirley Bassey, this is going to change how you two watch this forever or listen to it maybe. Just pretend that they're not diamonds, they're like penises. And that's why the whole song lyrics and their delivery. And apparently Saltzman wasn't impressed, but Shirley Bassey was in on it. And I can't
stroke it, kiss it, and undress it, or something is one of the lyrics in the song.
That kind of stuff. It's really it's quite it's like the whole sort of Harry Potter, like, you know, swap wand with Willie that people say at school. It's like, well, this guy legitimately did do it. I forgot who did write that, but that was amazing. That's pretty much any background I've got on that song. But it's Shirley Bassey coming back to Bonds. Obviously, it's one of the best Bond themes still. Yeah. But she's got her own caliber of how you view a James Bond song, and there's no one quite like her. And I absolutely love this Bond song. And I think this is a weird thing in me. Obviously, it's not a final thought, but I think when I was sort of marathoning it properly for the first time back in 2012, when I got to Diamonds Are Forever, I was so hyped because of the song. And it's that sort of horrible... I know it's got an incredible song, so you just don't assume the film is bad, because normally the bad Bond films couldn't have a bad Bond theme and whatnot. Whereas, well, I disagree for both parts of that. But,
I'll agree, Tate.
you see where I'm coming from. Like, if someone said this is the best Bond film that's been done, Bond theme, you'd be like, oh yeah, I bet the film's incredible. But no, it's really not. This could have been on any of a Bond theme just to make it better, but it was lovely to get her back, and obviously we do get her for a third go eventually.
It is kind of a shame, really, with like the quality of this film and compared to the actual song, and it's almost like I would have preferred a shit song to go with this film, really, and just sort of like give it a package deal. It's kind of really annoying that you have easily one of the best Bond songs attached to easily one of the worst Bond films. I think it's a tremendous song. It's got that sort of sultry, sexy quality to it. The really sort of, I don't even know what it's played on. It sounds like an electrical instrument. I don't know if it'd be a keyboard of some kind, but it's very elemental sound at the beginning, which I always love, and it kind of comes into it. You always know it's Diamonds Are Forever when that part of the song cues up. And again, as soon as you just say the name, this was the same with Goldfinger, this was the same with Thunderball, any good Bond song, as soon as you say the name, you want to continue the lyrics, as the very nice graphic at the bottom of the screen does. You want to add as many forevers in there as possible. I think it's amazing. And I just want to bring up Nikolai. It's actually him who told me about the song, the Seven theme. Don't you worry. We're going to get to the moon boogie. That's going to be in the worst moments of the film section, easily.
Very quickly. My thoughts on the Bond theme: top tier, absolutely top tier.
Yeah.
Like the performance is just phenomenal, and I think you with the instrument being used, it sounds like the film is twinkling like a diamond, and that is so well done. But it's one of those ones where I know, obviously, like I've already said, like you listen to the Bond soundtracks and stuff like that. You listen to the songs going through. You skip You Only Live Twice. You get to Under Her Majesty's Secret Service, you whack that up, and then you get to this one, you whack that up even harder. It's a good run of songs. In fact, that continues on through into the next film after this as well. Like, it is just a really good kind of stretch of songs back to back to back.
Yeah, it was a nice respite, actually. You have the awful pre-credit scene in this film, the pre-credits montage. I don't even think you can call it a scene, really. I guess it does go into a scene at a point. But as soon as it does that zoom in on the collar of the cat with the diamonds, and then this theme kicked in, I was like, oh, okay. Well, at least for the next 2 minutes, I'm going to really, really enjoy the film, and enjoy the film I did for that moment. Before we continue to tear this film a new one, let's go into some positives, because, as we mentioned last week, I think, Tom mentioned that there are always positives to every Bond film, no matter how hard they are to find. And there are some positives in this film.
Theme song?
Other than theme song, that's definitely up there. Some might begin and end their list right there. I do have a few other moments as well, which I think we've done very, very well. The car chase through Las Vegas, I thought was tremendous. Very, very well shot. The lighting from the neon, the stunt where it goes on two wheels, doesn't it, when it goes around one of the corners. I thought that was tremendous. I liked some of the camera work in there. I couldn't tell if they sped up the footage or not. Some elements looked like they'd been tweaked just ever so slightly. But I think, as we're moving into the 70s now, we're starting to get to that stage where things can actually be filmed at the correct speed, which was nice. It was, I don't even know what you'd call it, because I don't really know sort of like camera motions, but it's where we even see it in modern films, whether it be Fast and Furious or any car chase film, where the camera's very low level to the road and it's kind of tracking across the road, sort of like getting up in close with the cars. So I thought that was really good. And I did have a second scene, which I have completely forgotten now.
Scene. I'll continue on with the second scene, because it was what we talked about before, and it is the elevator scene.
That's it, yeah. Oh my God.
Very fantastic. Good close stunt work. Very, very good. Harkening back almost, it felt like the From Russia with Love train kind of fight scene. It was close quarters, claustrophobic, and very, very good stunt work.
I'm going to say I do like, even though I hate the fact that they do this with Blofeld, I love the scene where Bond clocks those two of them in the same room, and it's that game of wit. Like, where's the cat going to jump to? How are they going to one-up each other? Again, it's an interesting scene, but the execution of why that's in the film at the time it is, and why that wasn't a film I don't like. But I love the fact that he was trying to figure out which one was the right Blofeld. I'm not going to lie. I don't like the car chase. Not because it's not bad. It's because it follows on from the awful buggy chase. Like, they seem to, whenever you think it's when it's like we've just had an elongated scene, we've got another one, and the whole like going up. I think once you get to Man of the Golden Gun, I think that's sort of the 70s Bond car chases do really start to up the ante, and I think it's a great thing of where it's heading. If that makes sense. That this is the seeds of you're going to get more car chases over the next few years. And I think that does work very well. But it's just because it follows off that awful buggy sequence. That was the moment I switched from the TV to the laptop.
I'm going to go to Nikolai's right here as well. He's kind of in agreement with most of us right now. My positives, the one-liners are awesome. Nikolai, I know you want to get onto the one-liners, my man. We will get onto it, my friend. There are things in this one. That's the first one that I properly took notes for. I have 4 on my phone, and there's way more than 4 in the actual movie. So we'll get onto that in just a second. He mentions the elevator fight. I love that scene. You mentioned like the close quarters, how it was filmed. From Russia with Love is instantly the one that I was reminded of. I actually think it's probably up there. The elevated scene in this and that film are probably up there in terms of the best fight scenes in Bond history, I would say. They even still hold up to this day with how they were edited, how they were shot. It felt like you were part of the action, like you were in that very confined, claustrophobic space as well. And then I was trying to think of all the other elevator scenes that we get in Bond. More recently, I'm thinking there's an elevator in Casino Royale with Vesper where she drowns inside of it. And I think it's Skyfall. Doesn't he sort of like cling on to an elevator as it takes
you get the amazing, the silhouette, I think it's Tokyo. The silhouette sequence is fucking stunning.
So I was reminded that there's probably more, but they're the ones that sort of came to mind, especially like the recent ones. Right.
Worst scenes.
So how long have we got on this stream? Have we got another hour?
I say one worst scene each.
I don't know if I can do just one.
Can I go first then with my one? Because my one is the Scorpion death scene. One of the worst on-screen deaths in Bond.
So bad it's good.
That's so bad. So bad. The acting in the scene of the
the arm. It's the arm. You got to hold them up higher, thing.
It's overacted to the point where you have to think that the director probably saw him die the first time around and go, play it up a bit, and then kept on saying play it up a bit until they were like 2 days into shooting just this one scene, and he was like having to go full out each time. Yeah, awful.
I don't know if I want to steal the moon boogie sequence because I feel
Take
like
it if you want. Take it if you want.
I'm trying to think of anything else. It's just sort of moments for me. Just the inherent campy tone that really rubs me up the wrong way with this film. It's one of my one-liners, so I'm not going to say it. But certain character death scenes involving oh god, what's his name, Mr. Kidd and Mr. Wink. That's it. That is the noise he makes. It's just, you know, like the stuff like that. I hate it so much. So it's just little moments like that, really. Just the tone of the film is just the one that really pisses me off the most. I guess the Scorpion death scene was another moment as well. Some extreme reaction shots in this film as well. One of which was a GIF that I put on the socials earlier today. Let's just get into one of the main ones. George, go on. It's the scene. It's the moon boogie, right? Are you going to the moon boogie?
I was just thinking the entire finale. I know that's a bit of a cheat, but I'm just going to say I just, bar that average chase in Vegas, I just think the action is terrible in this film.
I'll say the effects, actually. I wanted to mention that. The explosion effects in this film, where they just put like a glare over an object and it's just like, oh, well, that's meant to have exploded. I don't even know if that was a limitation at the time or if it's just cheap. It just feels awful. Have we lost George? Oh no, he's back. There we go.
No, he's here.
I'm back. It's the effects aren't, you know, it's that era where they're trying to bring them in now. You know, computers are a thing. Again, I think Man of the Golden Gun's the first like computer programmed stunt, which we'll get to eventually. But I just think the action. I think when you go back to the previous three films, when the action has been, obviously on Majesty's Secret Service is very much that the action, the drama's fantastic as well. This one's the amalgamation on the opposite end, that the action wasn't that good. And I think for this big climax as well, you know, really, like, does anyone care that it's this? It's just shite. I'm sorry.
I don't mind the setting.
I'm struggling to say why it's bad. I love oil rig settings.
Some of the wide shots look great, like when the camera's panning around
it's just not interesting. It's what you said earlier, the construction crane.
Yeah,
we really needed a sequence of Blofeld needing. He really hired someone to drop him into the sea properly to get away. The most genius villain of all time. It's things like that that just get me. I hate it. I hate it so much. It's just, honestly, the concept of this film. This is why I can take so much pleasure from it. Like, when we get started every day, no matter if there are bad moments, there are some fucking incredible scenes. This is nothing. This is nothing. It's pathetic. And that's kind of my like final thing on that. I just hate it.
Well, Nikolai agrees with you as well. He's put the worst sequence for me has to be the climax. It's one of the worst in Bond history to me. So insanely boring. It's like the climax of Thunderball. You only live twice, and on Her Majesty's Secret Service done completely wrong.
At least Thunderball tried to do something.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? At least it was trying to be like the underwater one.
Yeah.
Whereas this one's just like, we can't really get Sean to run around properly anymore. But
especially after you've had the volcano base as well from You Only Live Twice, and just what they achieved with that set, and then you get this one. As I mentioned, like some of the wide shot, I don't have a problem with it being on an oil rig. It's just they didn't really, Guy Hamilton didn't really cover it well. Cinematography wise, it just looks like a place set, really, doesn't it? Well, I said that actually. No, that's unfair about the volcano set, but. Yeah, it's just kind of bland. It's just a bland film. It doesn't, at least with some Bond films, you mentioned about You Only Live Twice, you're kind of waiting for it to get to that set where the action really kicks in. And this film doesn't really have any moments like that, does it? It's just kind of a bit mellow.
I mean, I guess because George got his final thoughts in, I may as well get mine in, then go on to the Bond quote.
Well, can we talk about the moon boogie scene first? Because that's another.
Yeah, I'll let Chris have the moon boogie. Oh God, it just doesn't stop. It just doesn't stop. They get out of the facility and it carries on, and
so long.
It's kind of like maybe George Miller watched this and thought, you know what, I'd love one day to actually have an interesting car chase in the desert. Because this film is not that, and it's just awful. And I think it's them trying to make something smart, them take a really potentially interesting concept that could be classic, and it just like sort of Nelly. It's like the ridiculous idea that worked. Yeah, this is the ridiculous idea that didn't work because it's dreadful.
Yeah, and it's just there's moments that I'm still scratching my head at. Actually, like there's like a moon set, like they're shooting a space film with astronauts, and he's driving through it. And, people are chasing Bond like, you can't be in here, but the astronauts are trying to kill him as well, but they're still being in, low gravity. What is going on with that moment? I still don't know what was happening in that moment. It was like a fever dream, and it was a fever dream that kept going on and on and on. I'm getting pissed off just talking about it, just even thinking about it. I know that Bond has its ridiculous moments. We talked about the massage table, the stretcher in was that Thunderball? I can't even remember which one that was in. It's had its fair share. It's had its fair share of completely ridiculous moments. I want to see Bond doing loads of things. I don't want to see him driving a moon buggy with little crappy grabby arms. It looks like a toy that I'd have as a kid. Was this made to sell toys?
Yes,
I know
absolutely.
It was based off the Moon Rover. I get it, but why? It looks cheap. It looks terrible, cartoonish. Again, we keep coming back to that thing with the tone. It's cartoonish. It's just. And it goes on for so long. And then he's on like a weird little quad bike thing as well. I will say the dismount though is pretty goddamn badass when he drives back to Tiffany, jumps off the thing. And then I think it goes into the other car chase then, doesn't it? Straight afterwards. I can't say enough negative things about this scene. I do have one other negative moment actually, but I don't know if you guys have anything to say on
No, go for it.
The moon buggy atrocity. It's the edit. This comes down to the editing, or really just the moment, just everything with this scene. When Bond's in the casket and is in the crematorium, love the music in that scene. It's really intense. It sounds hellish. And, for one of the few times you feel like, I genuinely don't know how Bond's going to get out of this situation. And I'm invested. And, there's the ticking clock. Things are getting hotter. He's burning alive. And then it just kind of cuts and he's out of it and they've dragged him out. But it doesn't feel like there's any lead up. It feels like there's almost footage missing. It's just like you blink and the music's cut out and everything's fine, and it's never really reflected on. It's never even referenced again. He doesn't even fight the people that put him in that situation in the first place, and it just kind of stops. And it feels like a very disconnected, very abrupt cut to that scene, which I thought was actually building up as one of the main sort of memorable scenes from the film. It just comes out of nowhere. I don't know if you guys had that, and I remember doing that the first time I watched it. It kind of snapped me straight out of it, and I had exactly the same moment with it in this one as well.
I'm not gonna. I'm just snapped out for the entire thing. I'm going to be brutally honest. When I rewatched this yesterday, I was doing the ironing for the first half, so that's how phased out I was. That I didn't want to watch it, but I still did, and it's just a train wreck. You just lose interest. I think because the story's not gripping, the whole thing isn't. You're not in on the plot. There's nothing elaborate. Like I wonder what's going on. It's a simple like, hey, diamonds are a thing. Let's have this diamond thriller type, and it's just kind of there, like no, it's just not interesting. And also, is it really the kind of thing that James Bond would need to be doing? Do you really need your super secret agents getting diamonds? And I think that's where it loses me. That it's just, I'm not saying it doesn't need to be realistic. Of course, it does. James Bond, but it's just one of them where, as a story goes, as a plot device, a plot beacon, there's just nothing interesting about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one of those scenes where I genuinely forgot that scene was even in the film. It's one of those. It's such a non-scene because it builds up, and then they just
there's no payoff.
Completely ignore it. There's no payoff at all. But I feel like I guess at least my final thoughts in the film. This film is the only James Bond film that I think could work as a cartoon, and I think it would be perfectly natural for it to actually be a cartoon. It's so kind of over the top, and it's so out there, and it's so different, and such an overcorrection from the previous film. That it just goes against almost a lot of things that are very Bondy and things that go with the series. They just dial everything up to kind of the maximum limit, and it just doesn't work. There are some things in this film, like we said, that are good. that do come from it, but that is few and far between, and we're left with the rest of the film, which it isn't a stain on the franchise. It isn't so offensive that it kind of is out, and you can get some fun from rewatching it back and just not really caring about the film and how it kind of sits within kind of the rest of the series and stuff like that. But seeing as this is a retrospective where we're going back through every single film in the series, you do have to kind of compare it to the others, and when it's done that way, it just doesn't come off as a very good film at all.
Yeah, no, I'll agree with that. I actually wanted to bring up some more of Nikolai's comments right now. I didn't know this. He is teaching me Bond trivia right here. The original Climax had Bond chase Blofeld in his submarine to a salt mine and then battling him there, showing his death clearly. It might have been a lot better. And, Hennick mentioned maybe the producers didn't have the time to shoot the original ending. Nikolai replies, that's indeed the reason. They didn't have the time, and Sean Connery demanded to be paid a lot every day that they went over time. They also prematurely blew some explosives, and that might be why you have the really awful graphics over the screen simulating the explosives, I'm sure. And again, like going back to some of like the aerial combat, like was it what was the one with the little Nelly? That was You Only Live Twice, wasn't it? Yeah.
Twice, yeah.
We talked about how that was shot with the helicopters, and it's still tremendous how that was shot. It's amazing. And then you get to this, it just feels like such a step back. Shall we? Oh God, have we reached the segment? We have. Bond pun of the week. There are many of them. Now, unfortunately, with these, I don't have the context. So I'm going to try my best, if I can, to remember the context, because I'm not going to lie, a lot of this film just was sort of like in one ear and out the other. So actually, I'm going to try and find the comment, because I was beaten to one of them here. I don't know if someone can find it. It was the about getting something off your chest line. It's probably all the way up at the top of the comments now. I can't find it. But that one was a great one to kickstart. I think there's a scene where Bond first meets Tiffany, and she says, like, let me go and put some clothes on. He says, oh, please do not on my account. Quite liked that one. It's always the sexist Bond things, isn't it? I'm afraid you've caught me with more than my hands up. That got probably the biggest laugh out of me out of all of them. That might be my favorite one, actually. Your problems are all behind you now, when he slips the cassette tape into her undies. And the final one is the death scene of one of the henchmen at the end. He's certainly left with his tails between his legs. I think if I'm going to pick one out of all of them, though, I've got to give it to the I'm afraid you've caught me with more than my hands up, because that was classic Bond one-liner right there. And there are so many more in the film that I didn't write down, but those were the ones that got like an honorable mention for me. And I actually took notes. I can't remember if I've taken notes on any of the other ones, but this was the first one to do it. And I'm looking forward to the just amalgamation, just all of them that Roger Moore come up with in the next few films, because I know for a fact he's definitely one of the quippiest Bonds. So that'll do it for your Bond pun of the week. I don't know if you guys had any or any moments from it.
The hand up one made me laugh. I think when you've got the stiffness from last week, I don't think it gets close to that. But it is kind of that, like, I'm not saying it's creepy, it's Connery, but this is going back to that Roger Moore, that this Roger Moore delivering those would have worked so much better than Connery. Mm-hmm. I think that's what I'm more excited to, is when we're going to get to the Roger Moore films next week, that we get the ultimate. I think in terms of the delivery of one-liners, you've got Roger Moore a country mile above the other six. Then you've got Brosnan. Then you've got Connery. And I think that's what I love with the Roger Moore. It's that like charming, sophisticated one-liner he'll give to you.
Yeah, Nikolai in the comments has my one at least. My name is Plenty, but of course it is Plenty O'Toole, named after your father, perhaps. Excellent. But yeah, I think George got it absolutely right. Roger Moore delivering these lines would have just been another level. I feel like this film is a Roger Moore film, just with the wrong actor playing Bond in this case, which is sad to say about Sean Connery.
See, I don't think even he would have saved this film, to be honest. If Moore was in this, I think it's just fundamentally flawed from the ground up completely. You could switch this with any Bond, and maybe with sort of I was going to say a younger Bond, but we already said that he was older than Connery, so that doesn't even carry. Maybe some new blood would have sort of like made it more definable, I guess. You know, the fact that going back to Connery, it sort of goes into my final thoughts with this one. It wasn't the time for a retread. It feels stale, like everything about it. Like as of this point, the formula feels stale. Getting Connery back feels very desperate. He's noticeably older. He doesn't seem as engaged. I don't buy him in the action scenes anymore. He doesn't have the same sort of rugged charm that he had from certainly in his original one, Dr. No, and even some of the other ones as well. The suaveness is kind of gone. We talked about the Bond girls. It's just, absolutely atrocious in this film. I love Charles Gray. Again, as I mentioned, I think he's an amazing actor, and I think he did very well with what he was given. You know, he was clearly probably told to like play it campy and have fun with it, and he looks like he's doing exactly that. It just doesn't work for the character of Blofeld for me. And, you know, even we were struggling to think of positive scenes. There are a few maybe, but this is easily one of my least favorite Bond films, lowest tier possible. There's a lot I still have to watch, and you know, once we get to the end of this, we are going to do a ranking of all the Bond films. But I imagine this is easily probably going to be in my bottom 5 at least. It's one that I hope I never have to come back to now that we've done the retrospective on the channel for this one. I would skip this one. If you're a Bond aficionado, you know, you've already watched it. If you're going through them, then I'd say watch it at least once just for the sake of completion. But there's just nothing from this film. And especially, you know, going after On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which was a film that I seem to remember vaguely enjoying at the time, but after a rewatch and after that discussion we had last week, that's easily going to be probably in my top 3 now. It's such a step back, and it does feel desperate from the producers, from the studios, from everyone. It's just a real whimper, and it's a real shame as well, because, you know, this goes for sport as well. When you've had like a tremendous person that's defined a role, or, you know, an incredible sportsman, you always want them to retire on top. And I kind of feel like that's the case with Connery as well. Like, have you only lived twice, be the last one. That's fine. You have served your time well as James Bond. But unfortunately, we have to say that this was his final time. Not playing James Bond. He would return in 1983, I believe it is. We're not going to be reviewing that one, at least not in this lineup. But never say never again. And if he's, 12 years older in that film compared to this? Jesus Christ. But yeah, it's just a shame. It's just a real whimper of a film. Does nothing for me.
I can't add sort of final words to what I've already just said. This is, you know, I think I said this about one of the ones. This is only viewing in a marathon. You can't pick this out individually. You know, I really fancy watching, say, Diamonds Are Forever. No, just put the song on YouTube or Spotify and do yourself a favor there. You know, it's a whimper, but it's a sad whimper. But there's sort of light at the end of the tunnel, knowing that they needed to change things up. You know, they would have had their eyes in the future at this point. That Connery was coming back, but it wasn't going to be a 3, 4, 5 picture thing. This was always going to be he's coming back, then they're going to move on. And I think this is the sad state of it, that you don't want anyone to go, especially when you think of James Bond. You know, the iconic defining image of James Bond is Sean Connery as Bond. That is the definition image. And it's sort of going out on a whimper on this is not, and there's a reason why when you see those classic Bond photos, it's not ever the Bond photos from this film, is it? It's always the other ones.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you there. It's the end of an era, and it doesn't feel right that it should be. I feel like You Only Live Twice was respectable enough for it to be kind of the end. Even if he was on, I mean, they originally wanted him to be on Her Majesty's Secret Service, that probably would have been the end either way. But the fact that he was brought back for this film, I don't know, it just didn't fit in the end. It just didn't work out.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we finish, I do want to go through, we've got a few more puns of the week. We have Hennock with a exceptionally fine shot. I didn't know there was a pull down there. We were talking about that one earlier, I think, before we went live. That is a good one. Really dark line when you think into it, but it's funny. And Paul Addison as well, mentioning there's something I'd like to get off your chest. Another great line there. And kind of final thoughts from Nikolai on this one. He's put, I just fundamentally dislike Bond being turned into a parody of itself. I agree. You Only Live Twice was already dancing on the edge of that, but Diamonds Are Forever is full on Austin Powers territory. Yes, we didn't even talk about the space laser. I'm going to throw it in at the end. Giant space laser. I mean, can you get more ridiculous? Apparently you can, because the space lasers are a thing. They're here to stay in Bond. And the comparison that I forgot to make, I'm going to mention it now real quick. I talked about the comparison to Batman and Robin. What is Mr. Freeze's main villain plot of that film? Stealing diamonds to power a giant telescope that's going to doom the world. Very similar. So I guess that'll do it for our review on Diamonds Are Forever. We knew it was going to be bad, and I feel like this was therapy for us. It was good to just sort of like get it out there, a really cathartic experience going into this one. Thankfully, next time, we have a great Bond film, I want to say. So we will be back next Tuesday, the 8th of June, same time again, 8 p.m, for Live and Let Die. So 1973 film, once again directed by Guy Hamilton. A sense of oh God, what's the word I'm looking for? He makes amends, a sense of making amends with that film, definitely for me. I seem to remember that being one of my favorites. I'm very much looking forward to going back into that one. And I think we should bring up the graphics, shouldn't we? Of like, we've officially completed page 1 of the retrospective. So that's it. We say goodbye to Sean Connery and George Lazenby, and we head into new territory with Roger Moore. He's here to stay. I think Nikolai did mention as well, just really quickly at the end, there is, in my opinion, at least a real spiritual successor to On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but it will take some time to get there. I don't know which one that is. I don't know, George, if you've got an idea of what one that could be. I think he's going to keep us in suspense.
There's a Roger Moore film where he goes to Tracy's grave.
And then Blofeld pops back up after 10 years absent, and he throws him down the chimney.
Spoiler. It's that one. I remember the chimney.
Unless he means
that's A View to a Kill, isn't it?
No. That's Fiora's only, I think. Unless by spiritual successor, he maybe means Casino Royale, just in terms of having an actual a decent one go with the story arc. Who knows? Let us know nearer the time if this is the spiritual successor you're thinking of. But I'm intrigued now. One day, maybe, if a certain director gets hand on Bond, we'll probably get On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but a trilogy. He's called Christopher Nolan, and hopefully it happens. But that's the last time I bring him up until next week's James Bond discussion.
Absolutely. And we want to hand over to you guys as well. Now, we have had you obviously commenting all the way through and sharing your thoughts already. But if you are just discovering this review now after we've gone live, please let us know your thoughts on Diamonds Are Forever. Is there something to like in there? Did we forget to mention something? Probably. Anything you like regarding this film, whether you need to vent, whether you want to bring up something, please do like, comment, share, and subscribe. Doing these Bond reviews week to week is an absolute blast. We're having a great time going through them. Even if they're not a great Bond film, there's always something to talk about with them. And we enjoy engaging with you as well. And you can do that as well on our social medias. We're on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy. You can find us at Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy. And we're at TeePublic as well. So you can pick up this t-shirt and many more, including the one that you can see at the bottom of the screen right there with the James Bond logo on. So please do check those out if you feel so inclined. Once again, a massive thank you to everyone that's tuned in tonight for 1 hour and 20 of us ranting on this film. We do appreciate all of you, and we hope to see you on the next one. Take care, everyone.